Jake Morrison dragged his sleeve across his forehead, smearing dust and sweat into a muddy streak. The air recyclers on Xerxion 7 were garbage, pumping out stale oxygen that tasted like metal and regret. But this was work. Real work. The kind that paid enough to send money back home to Earth, where his sister was raising 2 kids on her own. He stood at the edge of Platform 12, looking down at the mining operation sprawled across the asteroid's surface. Massive drilling rigs punched into the rock, pulling out precious metals that would build ships and stations across the galaxy. It should have been impressive. Instead, it just looked brutal. The other workers moved around him like he was invisible. The Vrex towered over everyone, their bodies covered in thick armor plates that could stop a bullet. They didn't need environment suits for most of the work. Their skin was the suit. The Keltons were just as bad, with 4 massive arms that could lift support beams Jake needed a crane for. Even the Skrit, those bug-eyed insect things that chittered when they talked, were faster and tougher than any human had a right to be. 15 years. That's how long Jake had been out here, working his way up from grunt labor to foreman. He knew every inch of this operation. He knew which tunnels were stable and which ones were one bad day away from collapse. He knew how to read the rock, how to spot a gas pocket before the sensors did, and how to keep a crew alive when everything went wrong. But none of that mattered to Crane. The Vrex supervisor made it his personal mission to remind Jake what he was. Soft skin. Fragile. Weak. The words came through the translator with a mechanical edge, but Jake could hear the contempt underneath. Crane would say it loud enough for the other workers to hear, making sure everyone knew that the human foreman was just one mistake away from being replaced. The soft skin thinks he can lead? Crane had said yesterday, his black eyes fixed on Jake while a crew of Keltons laughed. Humans break like twigs. One bump, one fall, and they shatter. Jake had learned not to respond. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. He just did his job, checked his reports, and made sure the mining quotas were met. That was enough. It had to be enough. Then the maw collapsed. The deep shaft had been unstable for weeks. Jake had filed 3 reports about it, warning that the support structure needed reinforcement. But reports cost money, and money was more important than safety. So they kept drilling, kept pushing deeper, until the inevitable happened. The collapse was massive. 1/2 kilometer of tunnel just gone, crushed under millions of tons of rock. Worse, the stabilizers were offline. Those machines were the only thing keeping the rest of the tunnel system from following the maw down into oblivion. Someone had to go down there and reset them manually. Someone had to walk into a radioactive death trap and flip a switch. Crane called the emergency meeting in the main hub. All the supervisors were there, standing around a holographic display of the collapsed shaft. The radiation readings were displayed in angry red numbers that kept climbing. "We need a volunteer," Crane said, but his eyes were already on Jake. Jake felt his stomach drop. He knew what was coming. "The human will go," Crane announced. "Consider it a promotion." Nobody argued. The Vrex supervisors nodded. The Keltons looked away. Even the humans in the room stayed silent. Jake was the expendable one. The soft skin. The one who didn't matter. They gave him an environment suit that was already past its certification date. The seals were worn. The radiation shielding was barely functional. Jake checked the readings and knew the truth immediately. This suit wouldn't protect him. It would just keep him alive long enough to reach the stabilizers. After that, he was dead. The other workers gathered at the elevator shaft to watch. Some whispered to each other. A few Keltons made what might have been prayers in their clicking language. Others just smiled like they were watching entertainment. Crane supervised the suit sealing personally, making sure every clasp was locked. His black eyes gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction. "Your kind should have stayed on Earth, soft skin," Crane said as the elevator platform began its descent into the maw. "At least you'll die doing something useful for once." Jake watched the light from the surface shrink as the elevator dropped. His suit was already beeping warnings. Radiation levels rising. Oxygen mixture unstable. Seal integrity compromised. The numbers scrolled past on his helmet display, each one another nail in his coffin. The elevator shuddered. Metal groaned. Then the cables snapped. The platform fell 3 meters before the emergency brakes caught, slamming Jake against the floor. His helmet cracked against the metal, and stars exploded across his vision. When the world stopped spinning, he realized the elevator was stuck. The shaft above had collapsed further. There was no way back up. Jake was alone in the dark, with failing equipment and enough radiation to kill him in an hour. Maybe less. He activated his helmet light and looked down into the depths of the maw. The tunnel stretched into darkness, unstable and ready to collapse at any moment. There was only one direction left to go. Jake started walking deeper into the darkness. Jake's suit had maybe 20 minutes left before complete failure. The radiation counter had stopped climbing. It just read error in blinking red letters. That probably meant the sensor had been fried. That probably meant he'd absorbed enough radiation to kill 3 people. His nose wouldn't stop bleeding. He kept wiping it on the inside of his helmet, smearing red across the cracked visor. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the flashlight steady. Every breath burned going down like he was inhaling hot sand instead of oxygen. The tunnel walls were closing in. Not literally, but Jake's vision was narrowing, turning into a gray tunnel with a shrinking circle of light at the center. He knew what that meant. His body was shutting down, redirecting blood flow away from everything that wasn't essential. His brain was trying to keep him alive just a little bit longer. He should have been dead 10 minutes ago. The suit had failed completely. The seals were cracked open, exposing him to vacuum and radiation. But somehow he was still walking, still moving forward through the collapsed tunnel. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was just that his body hadn't figured out it was supposed to stop yet. The stabilizers were somewhere ahead. Jake couldn't remember exactly where. His thoughts kept sliding sideways, losing track of what he was doing. Reset the stabilizers. That was the mission. Get to the stabilizers, flip the switch, save the colony. Die a hero instead of a soft skin who broke like a twig. His legs gave out. Jake hit the ground hard, his helmet bouncing off the rock floor. He lay there for a moment, trying to remember how to stand up. His arms wouldn't cooperate. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. This was it. This was where Jake Morrison died, alone in the dark, bleeding out in a collapsed tunnel that nobody would ever excavate. They'd seal the maw and forget he existed. Maybe they'd put up a memorial plaque. Probably not. Then he saw the door. At first, Jake thought it was a hallucination. His dying brain conjuring up an exit that didn't exist. But when he blinked the blood out of his eyes and looked again, it was still there. The door was set into the rock wall about 15 feet to his left. Except it wasn't really a door. It was more like a section of wall that was too smooth, too perfect. The material was dark, almost black, and it seemed to absorb his flashlight beam instead of reflecting it. Symbols covered the surface. Not carved in. They looked like they were part of the material itself, glowing faintly with a blue-green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Jake tried to focus on the symbols, tried to make sense of them, but looking at them made his head hurt worse than the radiation poisoning. The mining operation had been drilling toward this thing for months. All those tunnels, all that excavation, and nobody knew they were about to break through into something that shouldn't exist. Jake crawled. He didn't have enough strength left to stand, so he dragged himself across the tunnel floor, leaving a smeared trail of blood behind him. His gloved hand reached out and touched the door's surface. It was warm. That was wrong. Everything in the asteroid was cold. But this material felt warm, almost alive, humming with energy he could feel through his torn glove. The door opened. Not sliding. Not swinging. It just ceased to exist, the material flowing away like water, leaving a dark opening into something beyond. Light bloomed inside. Not harsh white light like the colony's floods, but soft blue-green illumination that came from everywhere and nowhere. Jake crawled through the opening and found himself in a corridor that was impossible. The walls were smooth and curved, made of the same dark material as the door. The light seemed to be part of the structure itself, glowing from within. As Jake moved forward, the corridor changed. Walls shifted. The path curved in directions that didn't make geometric sense. He was moving through a space that existed in more dimensions than his dying brain could process. His legs stopped working completely. Jake collapsed, his body finally giving up. He lay on the smooth floor, staring up at a ceiling that seemed infinitely far away. His vision was almost gone now, narrowed to a pinhole of blurry light. Then the pinhole went dark. Jake's eyes closed. He stopped breathing. For a moment, perhaps 3 or 4 seconds, Jake Morrison was technically dead. That's when the facility noticed him. Emergency lights blazed to life. Panels in the wall slid open. Jake's unconscious body was lifted by invisible forces and carried deeper into the complex, into a vast chamber filled with machines that had been waiting for millions of years. A cluster of silver needles descended from the ceiling, attached to mechanical arms that moved with insect-like precision. They positioned themselves over Jake's body, scanning, analyzing, measuring. The facility had been built by a race that died before humans learned to make fire. It had one purpose, programmed into its core systems and left running for eons. Find compatible biological material. Preserve it. Enhance it. Ensure survival. Jake's body was compatible. The protocol activated. The needles punched through his suit and into his flesh. Jake's eyes snapped open and he screamed. The needles were hollow, pumping liquid silver directly into his bloodstream. It burned. It felt like acid in his veins, spreading from his chest to his extremities. His back arched. His hands clawed at the air. The machines held him down, indifferent to his suffering. They were following instructions given by beings who had been dust for 1,000,000 years. The silver liquid wasn't medicine. It was technology. Nanomachines smaller than cells, programmed with instructions written in the language of atoms. They spread through Jake's dying body like a flood, analyzing everything they found. Damaged tissue. Failed organs. Bones weakened by radiation. A nervous system on the verge of complete collapse. The nanomachines began to rebuild. Jake's screams echoed through the empty facility as his body was taken apart and put back together. Bone was dissolved and reconstructed with metallic frameworks woven through the marrow. His heart stopped, was rebuilt with synthetic fibers that could pump harder and longer than muscle. His lungs were restructured, optimized, enhanced beyond human limits. His nervous system was the worst. The nanomachines threaded through every nerve, wrapping them in conductive filaments that connected to processors embedded in his spine. Jake felt every second of it, every nerve firing with signals that told him he was being destroyed and reborn simultaneously. It took 3 days. On the surface, Crane stood in the operations center and officially declared Jake Morrison deceased. The maw was sealed with plasma charges. The incident report listed it as an unfortunate accident caused by equipment failure. Nobody asked questions. Nobody cared. But deep below the sealed tunnel, in a chamber that predated human civilization, Jake Morrison opened his eyes. Jake spent the first few hours in the ancient facility just learning to walk again. His body moved differently now. Every step was precise, calculated by systems in his brain that hadn't existed before. He could feel the weight distribution, the angle of his joints, the exact amount of force needed to move efficiently. It was strange. It was terrifying. And it felt absolutely right. When he finally decided to head back up, Jake stood at the entrance of the facility and looked up at the collapsed tunnel above. 500 meters of unstable rock and twisted metal. The path he'd crawled down was completely destroyed. There was no clear way up. He placed his hand against the wall and felt something incredible happen. Information flooded into his mind. He could sense the molecular structure of the rock, see the weak points where stress had created fractures, feel the pockets of space between the debris. It was like having X-ray vision but deeper. He understood the tunnel at a fundamental level that shouldn't have been possible. Jake focused his thoughts and pushed. The rock under his hand began to change. Stone fused together, molecular bonds strengthening and reorganizing. What had been crumbling rubble became solid wall. He moved his hand along the surface, and the transformation followed his touch like a wave. The tunnel was rebuilding itself. Jake started climbing. Every handhold he grabbed became stronger. Every foothold solidified under his weight. He wasn't just finding a path through the debris. He was creating one, reshaping the maw from the inside out as he ascended. Metal supports that had been twisted and broken straightened under his touch. He could feel the metal structure, understand its composition, and encourage it to return to its original form. Beams that should have required industrial equipment to repair simply reformed when he focused on them. It took 2 days to reach the top. Jake didn't need to stop for food or water. His body had been optimized, rebuilt to operate on minimal resources. He didn't even feel tired. The exhaustion that used to plague him after a long shift was just gone, replaced by a steady, constant energy that never seemed to drain. As he climbed, he improved everything he touched. Support structures became stronger. Weak sections of tunnel were reinforced. He installed stability where there had been chaos. The maw, which had been a death trap waiting to collapse, was transforming into the most structurally sound tunnel in the entire mining operation. When Jake finally reached the sealed entrance, he stopped and examined the blast door they'd used to close off the shaft. It was 3 feet of reinforced steel, designed to contain explosions and prevent cave-ins. The control panel next to it was scorched and dead, destroyed when they'd sealed the tunnel. Jake placed both palms flat against the metal surface. He could feel the door's structure. Every bolt, every weld, every molecular bond holding the steel together. He thought about it opening, pictured the metal flowing aside, and his will made it reality. The blast door rippled like water and split down the middle, the two halves sliding smoothly into the walls. Alarms immediately started blaring across the facility. Red warning lights spun in the corridors. The emergency system had detected a breach in a sealed section, and it was letting everyone know that something was very wrong. Jake stepped through the opening and onto platform 12. The work shift was in full swing. Vrex and Keltons were operating drilling equipment, moving cargo containers, checking readouts on screens. The sudden alarm had frozen everyone in place, all eyes turning toward the sealed section that shouldn't have been opening. Then they saw Jake walk out of the maw. The noise of machinery died. A Kelton dropped the cargo container he was holding. A Vrex stumbled backward, his armored plates clattering against a railing. A Skrit made a high-pitched chittering sound that might have been fear. Jake looked different and everyone could see it. His skin had a quality to it that wasn't quite right, catching the overhead lights with a metallic sheen. His eyes reflected the glow of the work lamps, silver and bright like polished mirrors. He moved with a fluid grace that humans didn't have, each step perfectly balanced and controlled. Crane was standing near the platform's edge, a data pad in his clawed hands. When he saw Jake, the data pad slipped from his grip and clattered on the metal floor. "Impossible," Crane breathed, the translator barely managing to capture the shock in his voice. Jake walked forward calmly. Every worker on the platform backed away, creating a circle of empty space around him. They looked at him like he was something they'd never seen before. Something they didn't understand. "The structural reset is complete," Jake said. His voice was calm, measured, carrying clearly across the platform even without raising it. "The maw is stable. Better than stable, actually. And we need to talk about your mining operations." A Kelton worker, a four-armed giant named Thorin who'd always been polite to Jake, took several steps backward. His multiple eyes were wide with something close to fear. "What happened to you down there?" Thorin asked, his voice trembling. Jake smiled. It wasn't quite the smile he'd had before. There was something else in it now, something confident and knowing that hadn't existed in the old Jake Morrison. "I got better," he said simply. Crane recovered from his shock, his natural arrogance flooding back. His armor plates rattled as he puffed himself up to his full 8-foot height, trying to reassert dominance through sheer size. "You abandoned your post," Crane shouted, his translator making the words sharp and accusatory. "You will submit to medical examination and disciplinary." Jake reached out and touched the control panel mounted on the wall next to him. Every screen in the facility lit up simultaneously. Data flooded across hundreds of displays, showing structural analyses that nobody had access to, stress calculations that required specialized equipment to measure, and geological surveys that would have taken weeks to compile. Mining equipment across the entire colony activated and deactivated in perfect sequence, a wave of machinery responding to commands that nobody had sent. The lights in the facility dimmed, then brightened, then created a rolling pattern that swept across the platforms in a deliberate wave. Jake was demonstrating control of systems that should have been isolated and secure. "I said we need to talk," Jake repeated, his silver eyes fixed on Crane. "You were drilling toward something you don't understand. Something ancient and powerful that was sealed for a reason. If you'd breached the containment chamber, it would have triggered a reaction that would have destroyed every colony in this sector. Millions dead because you were too cheap to listen to safety reports." He took a step closer to Crane, and the massive Rex actually flinched. "You tried to kill me," Jake said quietly. "You sent me down there to die because I was human. Soft skin. Breakable. Instead, you made me into the only person who can protect you from your own stupidity." The words hung in the recycled air of the platform. Every worker heard them. Every alien standing there understood that something fundamental had just shifted. The human wasn't the weak one anymore. The human was something else entirely. Crane didn't waste time. Within an hour of Jake's return, he was on a secure channel to Consortium headquarters, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Jake Morrison was no longer just an insubordinate worker. He was a security threat. An unknown variable. Something that couldn't be controlled or predicted, and the Consortium didn't tolerate things it couldn't control. The message was clear. Jake needed to be contained, studied, and if necessary, eliminated. The response came faster than anyone expected. A Consortium security ship dropped out of hyperspace and docked at the colony within 6 hours. The security team that marched onto Platform 12 was equipped for war, not for dealing with a single mine worker. They wore full combat armor, carried plasma rifles, and moved with the coordinated precision of soldiers who'd seen real action. Behind them came the corporate representatives. 3 Vrex in expensive suits, their armor plates polished to a mirror shine. The lead representative was named Thane, and he carried himself with the kind of arrogance that came from never being told no. They found Jake in the main facility bay, standing calmly near a cargo loading area. He hadn't tried to run or hide. He was just waiting, like he knew they were coming and didn't particularly care. The security team spread out in a tactical formation, surrounding him in a semicircle with weapons raised and ready. Red targeting lasers painted dots across Jake's chest. 12 soldiers, all aiming to kill if necessary. Thane stepped forward, his translator projecting his words with mechanical authority. Jake Morrison. By order of the Consortium Security Division, you will surrender yourself for immediate medical and psychological examination. Your condition must be assessed and catalogued. Jake stood with his arms crossed, looking utterly relaxed despite being in the crosshairs of a dozen weapons. His silver eyes scanned the security team with calm interest. No, he said simply. Thane's armor plates clicked together in irritation. This is not a request, human. This is a lawful order under Consortium Regulation 742. You will comply. I know it's not a request, Jake said. His voice was steady, almost conversational. And I'm still saying no. He knelt down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might spook the trigger-happy soldiers around him. His hand touched the metal floor of the bay. Everything happened at once. Every piece of equipment in the bay roared to life simultaneously. Mining drones that had been parked along the walls lifted off, their anti-gravity systems engaging in perfect synchronization. Cargo loaders stomped forward on hydraulic legs, positioning themselves between Jake and the security team like mechanical bodyguards. The massive blast doors at both ends of the bay slammed shut with a sound like thunder, sealing everyone inside. Then the environmental controls shifted. The atmosphere thinned just slightly, dropping the oxygen content by 3%. It wasn't dangerous, but it was enough to make the Vrex uncomfortable. Their species needed richer air than humans did. Within seconds, the security team was breathing harder, their concentration wavering. Thane raised one clawed hand, signaling the team to fire. The soldiers squeezed their triggers. Nothing happened. The plasma rifles clicked uselessly. The targeting systems went dark. The soldiers stared at their weapons in confusion and growing fear. Their equipment had been disabled completely, and they had no idea how. Jake stood up slowly, his hand leaving the floor. He hadn't moved from his spot, but he'd just taken complete control of every system in the bay. Every computer, every machine, every electronic device now responded to him instead of its original operators. I found something down there, Jake said. His voice came from every speaker in the colony simultaneously, echoing through corridors and work areas, reaching every person on Xerxes 7. Something old. A facility built by a civilization that existed before any of us. Technology that makes everything you have look like stone tools and wooden wheels. He gestured, and holographic displays materialized in the air around him. They showed the Maw's true depth, the ancient facility hidden in the rock, and the containment field that had been holding back something catastrophic. The images rotated slowly, showing data that made the Vrex representatives lean forward despite themselves. You were drilling straight toward it, Jake continued. Another week, maybe two, and you would have breached the containment. The reaction would have destroyed this asteroid belt and every colony within 5 light-years. 300,000 people dead because you ignored safety reports and kept pushing for bigger quotas. The holographic display shifted, showing casualty projections and blast radius calculations. The numbers were staggering. The security team lowered their useless weapons, staring at the data. Even Thane looked shaken. If I hadn't gone down there, if I hadn't stopped it, all of you would be dead right now, Jake said. You sent me down there to die, and instead I saved your lives. Thane recovered his composure, his armor plates puffing out in an attempt to look authoritative. That may be true, but it doesn't change the fact that you are now in violation of. Here's what's going to happen, Jake interrupted, his voice cutting through Thane's speech like a knife. Mining operations in this sector stop immediately. The ancient facility goes under protection. Nobody touches it without my authorization. And the consortium issues formal apologies and reparations to every human worker you've exploited, abused, and endangered across all your operations. Thane's armor plates flared in outrage. You cannot make demands of the consortium. You're a mine worker. You have no authority to. Jake smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. Every computer terminal in the colony chimed simultaneously. Data packets were being transmitted across the sector at light speed, broadcasting to every regulatory agency, every competing corporation, and every news outlet within range. The transmissions contained everything. Safety violations going back 10 years. Financial crimes. Evidence of the attempted murder of Jake Morrison, sent to die in the Maw with faulty equipment. Records of workers injured or killed due to negligence. Proof of bribes paid to inspectors. Everything the consortium had worked so hard to hide was now public knowledge. I just did, Jake said calmly. Your choice now is whether you cooperate with my demands or whether I keep digging into your records. I have access to everything now. Every file, every message, every dirty secret you thought was encrypted and safe. And I've got all the time in the world to expose every single one. The security team looked at Thane, waiting for orders that didn't come. The corporate representative stood frozen, probably calculating the damage that had just been done to the consortium's reputation and stock price. 2 weeks later, Crane was removed from his position and escorted off the colony in disgrace. An official investigation was launched. The consortium, facing legal action from a dozen different governments and the worst publicity crisis in its history, agreed to Jake's terms. They didn't have a choice. Mining operations in the sector were suspended. The ancient facility was declared a protected archaeological site. And human workers across the consortium's holdings received formal apologies and compensation packages that their union representatives had been fighting for unsuccessfully for 20 years. Jake Morrison, the soft-skinned foreman they'd mocked and sent to his death, had beaten the entire consortium without throwing a single punch. He'd just shown them that humans, given the right tools, could be far more dangerous than any armored Vrex or four-armed Kelton. The balance of power had shifted. And everyone in the galaxy was starting to notice. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison climbed out of that ancient facility, and everything had changed. He stood on a viewing platform, hands resting on the cold metal railing, looking out at something that shouldn't exist. A massive space station floated in the darkness before him, its structure gleaming under the distant sun. But this wasn't like the boxy, practical stations humans usually built. This one curved and spiraled in ways that seemed impossible, using principles he'd learned from the precursor facility deep underground. The station was beautiful, elegant, and it worked better than anything conventional engineering could produce. Power flowed through it like blood through veins. Systems integrated so smoothly they barely needed maintenance. It was a structure that sang with efficiency. Jake's crew had grown too. Looking down at the construction floor below, he could see dozens of workers moving between stations. Vorians with their feathered crest. A few Kresh with their six-limbed bodies. But mostly he saw humans. More humans than he'd ever worked with before. Word had traveled fast across the colonies. Humans could do something the other species couldn't. They could adapt. They could bond with technology that left everyone else confused and frustrated. Jake had changed, yes. But he'd dragged humanity's reputation up with him. Morrison. The voice made him turn. Crane was walking toward him and Jake almost didn't recognize him. The Vorian looked smaller somehow, even though he was still the same height. His armor, once polished to a mirror shine, was now dull and scratched. There were no command insignias on his chest anymore. Just a simple badge that read Safety Inspector. They demoted him. Assigned him to verify Jake's projects met regulations. For someone who'd once commanded hundreds of workers across multiple sites, it was the ultimate fall from grace. Crane, Jake said, keeping his voice neutral. Here to check the structural integrity? He held out a datapad. Crane took it with trembling claws, and Jake watched his former supervisor's eyes scan the screen. The calculations there were beyond standard curriculum. Mathematics that seemed to predict stress points before they even formed. Material science that violated half the rules Crane had memorized in engineering school, yet somehow worked perfectly. Crane's beak clicked softly as he scrolled through page after page. Finally he looked up. It's flawless, he admitted, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Jake nodded once. Good. Can't have anyone thinking we cut corners. For a moment they just stood there. The silence stretched between them, filled with history. Crane had sent Jake down into that shaft expecting him to die. Maybe even hoping for it. And now here they stood, their positions completely reversed. What you became down there, Crane said suddenly. His black eyes fixed on Jake's face. Are there more like you? Jake considered the question. Not yet, he said. But we're learning. See, humans have something your species never needed to develop. You folks were stronger, faster, better protected from the start. You didn't need to learn how to work with your tools the way we did. We had to because we were weaker. Softer. He smiled slightly. Turns out, when you give us tools like this, we can build wonders. An alarm chimed on Jake's wrist display. He glanced down and saw a message from Lisa Chin, one of his human workers 3 sectors away. She'd hit a structural problem and needed consultation. Jake's eyes flashed silver for a moment as he interfaced with the station systems remotely. He could see what she was seeing now, feel the metal and energy responding to her thoughts. He guided her through the solution with quick mental commands, showing her how to redirect the power flow. He was training them, passing on everything he'd learned in that dark facility. Not every human could bond with precursor technology the way he had. Some tried and felt nothing. But humans were proving far more compatible than any other species in the galaxy. And each person who learned would teach others. Each generation building on what came before. Jake looked at Crane one more time. Something made him speak. "Thank you, by the way." Crane's head tilted in confusion. "For what?" "For sending me down there." Jake's eyes flashed silver again. "If you hadn't tried to kill me, I'd never have found what I was meant to be. I'd never have helped my people find what we were meant to be." He turned and walked back toward the station entrance, already linking with the construction systems. His consciousness touched the metal, felt the energy patterns, guided the work happening on 50 different levels. Behind him, Crane stood motionless on the platform, watching the human who'd once been beneath him, the soft skin who should have died in the dark, now shaping metal and energy with nothing but thoughts. The galaxy had mocked the human Foreman. They'd sent him to his death as a joke. Instead, he'd come back as something greater. Something new. And he was just the beginning. More humans were learning every day. Finding that spark of connection with technology older than recorded history. They were evolving not through biology but through understanding. Through adaptation. And this time humanity had the tools to build their own future. No one could take that away from them now.